Every city claims to have them, and every city will tell you that theirs is the best. Most larger places will lay claim to having quite a few. I, of course, am speaking of secret bars. You know, the kind of bars with no name out front, where a secret password is required to even get in. This is what started my obsession, and may have very well cost me my soul. The year was 2001. I had just turned 21 earlier that year, and had already done up all the new freedoms that come with that age. I had done bars, casinos, you name it. At first it was cool, because for years I had felt like a kid, like somewhat behind the ears idiot that the rest of the world sort of just patted on the head. Hell, even after turning 21, things remained annoying. People would hear that I was 21 and just treat me like a young adult or a new 21. It was annoying. I worked downtown in a dreary office job, inputting data. The nice thing about it, though, was my hours. 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. And for a single guy in the early 20s, it was perfect. I just got to sleep in every day. And I would get up, go to work, just in time to take a quick walk away to work after I'm done, and go to the New Orleans Central Business District, cross over Canal Street, and bam, I was in the French Quarter, land of booze and women. Lots of fun times are spent down there. But as I said, even the beginning, it got boring. I mean, really boring. So I began to research for something different. How about a secret bar? I found a few right away, and most of them were just as boring as the regular bars. One in particular, called Mythique, was located up a narrow stairwell, accessible only through a tiny door located under the bar downstairs. And once I got up there, though, it was just another bar. The clientele was a bit more pretentious. Most of them thought that they were the second coming of Lestat, but in the end, it was the same thing. A bar, drinks, people, and usually crappy music. I remember one night I was at home in my tiny apartment using the Metacrawler. Remember, this was 2001, and searching for more secrets in my city that I was now old enough to exploit. I kept finding links to the same boring places I always went to. Then my email binged, or should I say announced, "You've got mail." I clicked my email and saw that the heading for my message read Secret Bar. Now, I was sure if I had asked anyone on my AOL buddy list for help and I didn't recognize the sender. I figured maybe I was in for a chat room one night and asked around, but I figured it was worth a check. The email was simple and short, and it read something like this: Secret New Orleans bar. Looking for a journey, not afraid of hell, not too shy for heaven? Then come visit us. Be in Jackson Square tonight at 2 a.m. Wear a black shirt and gray pants and have a cup of coffee in your hand. Seat yourself in the third bench. This is your only invitation. Miss it and you will never be invited again. P.S. Come alone. Tell no one. That was the end of the email. I was lucky that my job required me to wear a suit because it just so happened that I had a pair of gray slacks. I pulled on a black t-shirt and realized that I actually looked pretty good. I figured this could be a prank, but even if it was, and even if it turned out to be nothing, I would go out and have a few drinks anyways. Maybe I would even get laid. I didn't have to go into work the next day, so this night could turn out to be fun anyway. However, I may have been a bored, idiotic 21-year-old, but I wasn't totally stupid. This could also be a trick, a trap, or something worse. So I called my best friend Mike. I told him that I was going to be out with some strangers from work and that I wasn't sure about any of them. So I told him that I would call him by 4 a.m. and if I didn't, for him to call and check on me. I told him I would be in the quarter. Mike had to be up at work at 4, so it wouldn't put him out of the way to call me when he got up. I left my apartment at around 1:30 in the morning. 1:30 a.m. I only lived about 15 minutes away from downtown, but I figured I would make sure that I was on time. By 1:55, I was sitting on the third bench in Jackson Square, sipping my coffee and waiting. At 2 a.m., the cathedral bells rang out twice, and I received a tap on the shoulder. A gorgeous woman was sitting next to me, and I thought to myself, this is too cliche to be real. To me, she seemed like a walking cliche for a hidden bar. A goth girl, maybe? Mid-20s, really hot. Yeah, she was from this bar. I knew it from the start. I'm Jody, the woman said. Well, at least you're not Raven or Death or Lilith or some other stereotypical goth name. I replied, but I did not do so with a smile. She returned my not so pretty smile, but nonetheless it was, with her own type of smile. Nope, always been Jody, she replied. And you must be Kurt, right? She knew my name. That's pretty cool. Of course, my name was on my AOL profile where the email was sent from, so if this was her attempt to be at a cool trick, I was one step ahead. Yeah, Kurt, that's me. That's my name. I guess you're here to show me the secret bar. I asked, only if you're ready to journey to hell or heaven, depending on your taste, she said. We like to consider this to be a first back out point for our new clients. You can decline the invitation now and go home, or to some other bar, or wherever you like. Only be warned that no other invitation will ever come to you again. I considered this and decided that it was already after 2 a.m. and I was dressed and full of coffee. I wanted to definitely see this place. Lead on, Miss Jody, I replied. Lead on. She stood up and began to walk ahead of me, and at a rapid pace, I might add. We walked in the silence for some time, weaving deep into the quarter, past Bourbon Street, past all the loud and drunk tourists, past the warm and safe lights of the cop cars, the music from the bars. Before long, we were in the dark part of the quarter, mostly residential, and very few people were on the streets, and this way. She suddenly stopped and walked up to the stoop to a private residence. She fiddled with the keys, opened the door, and gestured for me to enter. Wait, is this someone's house? I asked her. This is the house of where the dead scream in silence, where the walls rot, where pain becomes pleasure, where pleasure becomes death. This is the house of Den. He who dwells on the black star, enter. I thought this was the coolest pitch for a bar I had ever heard. I figured it was rehearsed, but she said that whole little phrase with a lot of conviction. I had no idea who Den was, and I certainly didn't know about the black stars, but I had a desire to push on. She walked me into the house, which was empty. No furniture, nothing. Now, French Quarter real estate wasn't cheap. So if this place was renting a house just to serve as the cover for a bar, they clearly took themselves seriously. this might not be so boring after all. Now, what happened next was strange. She turned me towards a small hallway with an elevator. Now, I know that some houses back in the day had elevators. However, this one only appeared to go down. New Orleans isn't exactly known for having basements, especially in homes. As I went to step in, she stopped me once more. "This is your second chance to back out," she said. "Same as before, you can turn around and leave. No harm, no foul." "Just push the button," I replied, pointing at the down button, and stepped in. The elevator ride felt long, really long. At first, I was thinking that this was impossible, and no one builds down in the city. Hell, we even have to bury our dead above ground. As far as I could see, though, we were definitely going down. This was one of those older elevators with just the metal grate door, and I could see wood and metal going past us, and this eventually gave way to stone. I was about to question this when it occurred to me. "Cool trick," I said. "Trick?" Jody asked. "Yeah. The elevator is rumbling in place while a rolling graphic goes by outside to make it look like we're going down. Right? Because while I am no expert on elevators, I would say that we'd have already went down at least, 20 stories below the city? And I know that isn't possible." "You're right," she replied, grinning. "We aren't 20 stories below the city. We are now at least 2,000 stories below, if you are using stories as a measurement." I wanted to say something back about how that was a lie. It had to be a lie, didn't it? We hadn't been riding that long, and that amount of depth wasn't even possible on a tiny elevator like this. However, I figured this was all part of the act, like her whole speech about the House of Den and all that crap. I didn't want to become too obnoxious or pushy. She might end up asking me to leave, figuring I would ruin the scene for other patrons. Instead, I just smiled and decided to play along with a really cool and elaborate bar scene. Fake or not, this was by far the most ambitious effort I had ever seen put forward for a drinking establishment. Shortly after the elevator stopped, Jody stepped in front of the doors, but before she opened them up, she turned back to me. "This is your final chance to back out. If you wish, I will take you back. However, once I open these doors, you will be in hell. You may find your way back to the surface tonight, but some find that leaving is just impossible. Some stay in the interest of the free will and fair play. I am bound by the Council of Nod to offer you this final chance to return to your life. Choose now," she said. "Amazing speech, Jody," I replied. "Really great. You guys clearly put some thought into this. I want to go to this bar." She smiled and opened the doors. A small door sat at the end of the wooden hallway, and that looked like it may have been built around the time of the pyramids. There were no lights. I could only see by the small electric light of the elevator and the light coming from the door ahead. I walked forward, and as soon as I stepped off the elevator, the heat hit me. It wasn't so hot that I couldn't take it, but if anyone has ever experienced being in an attic on a really hot day with no ventilation, then you'll have an idea of how this felt. The air was thick beyond description. I instantly was covered in sweat, and I knew that if I stayed this hallway for too long, I would pass out. I turned to look back and saw that the elevator already was heading back up. From what I could see, there was no button to call it back down either. I guess Jody wasn't kidding when she said that This was my last chance to back out. I crossed my fingers, and the bar would be air conditioned. And I walked forward into the light. What happened over the next couple of hours is largely a blur. I will tell you this best as I can. I entered that bar. It was small. It was very small. About the size of a bedroom. There was a single wooden bar, 3 bar stools pushed up on it, 3 small tables in the corner area. The room was poorly lit. Only a small light bulb, and it was hanging from a single cord, was providing the light. However, it was well lit enough to see everything, and sitting right on the bulb seemed the most logical. There was a small shelf behind the bar, typical setup. Liquor bottles in front of the mirror. There were 5 others in this room, plus the bartender. I saw a gothic girl sitting at one of the tables, sipping a drink with a rather plain dressed man. There were 2 gentlemen at the other table. One was wearing a business suit, and the other was wearing an awful cowboy attire that was popular in almost every walk of life, even secret bars. There was another woman, average in appearance, probably in her mid-30s, smoking at the other side of the bar. Of course, there was to me, so that completed our little circle. There was no music playing. The walls were old wood, oak maybe. The bartender now was a classic. He was white shirt, black pants, suspenders, and bow tie. Like something out of the roaring 20s. And it was still hot down there too. Not as bad as the hallway, but pretty awful. Liquor will only make it hotter. But I was there now. I figured I would test the waters. Now as for liquor, I saw no bottles that I could recognize. None were labeled. There was no beer either. No name brands, no cash register, no bar mat. This place was as simple as you could want. After a moment, the bartender spoke to me. "Welcome to hell," he announced, smiling. "Cool name," I said. Sort of expected it, though. I tried not to sound rude or pretentious. They had put on a great show tonight, but calling the place hell, really? Too predictable. "Well, it translates differently in lots of places," he said. "Hell is just the way that you know it. Shall I call it something else?" he asked. And he didn't seem to be joking or annoyed. "No, hell is fine," I said. "How about a drink?" Jack and Coke, please," I said. "No Jack here, and no Coke either," he answered at once. "What do you have then?" I asked. "Well," he said, "most people down here have a drink that we call regret. I also serve you loneliness. Or, if you're feeling particularly bold, our house special is damnation." Wow, you guys are really playing up this hell thing. "Okay, serve me some regret, please." He handed me a drink. He poured it from a brown bottle. It was old. It tasted amazing, though. I figured it to be bourbon and wished that I had some Coke to mix with it. Apparently, there was no ice here, either. I chuckled. "Of course not. Ice in hell? What am I thinking?" The drink was tasty, though. And the buzz, it hit me quick. Very quick. I ordered a loneliness and began to look around at my fellow patrons. None of them seemed to even notice me. The goth girl was cute, though. So I picked up my drink and I decided to walk over to her, when suddenly the woman sitting at the bar began to whimper. "I'm so thirsty. Can I please have some water?" She seemed to be pleading this to the bartender. "No, ma'am," he replied, with the same stupid grin. "No water in hell, not even a small amount. Have another cigarette, though. Wash it down with some hard liquor," he said. No more smoking. My mouth is too dry. No more liquor. Water, please, she continued to ask. And to me, it began to sound a lot like begging. Instead of handing her water, he held out an unlit cigarette. It was then that I noticed that the overflowing ashtray, the size of a damn punch bowl sitting next to her, it was full of butts. Had to be over 1,000 of them in there. Had she smoked all them herself? I strained my eyes and studied her harder. Her lips were blistered badly. She had been at it for a while. The bartender patiently held out a cigarette, grin never leaving his face, until she finally sighed and took it. He produced a lighter, and she took a drag. She began to cough violently, gagging too. I decided to chime in. Hey man, she doesn't look so hot, and I really don't think that she needs another smoke. She looks like she's dying of thirst too. Call the elevator. Man, she's had enough, I think. The bartender turned, this big smile on me. Who? Old Nancy here? No. Nancy's a trooper. Man, smokes a couple packs a day. And as far as her thirst, well, she knew this place was a thirsty sort of dive before she walked in the door. But she wanted to be here. She's getting exactly what she wanted. I walked over to Nancy and placed my hand over her shoulder. Ma'am, if you want to get out of here, I'll walk you over to the elevator. You don't look so great right now. I tried to sound as concerned as a 21-year-old kid could sound. Nancy looked at me and smiled. Oh, I'm fine. Just fine, she said. But her mouth quivered as she spoke. The bartender was watching us like a hawk, still smiling, but his smile no longer looked so friendly. Everything okay? He asked, beaming like a used car salesman. Nancy shakily replied yes. The bartender turned around, and in that second Nancy gripped my arm hard, pulled me into the smog that was coming from her breath, and whispered, "Leave while you can." So low that I almost missed it. Her breath was like a chimney. She must have been chain smoking for days. I smoked, and so do most of my friends, and even on nights when we would chain smoke and pound booze until the sun rose, none of us were ever that toxic. I walked over to the man in the business suit. He at least appeared sane. "Hey sir, I think that lady over there needs help," I said to him. The man looked at me and laughed. "We all need help, kid. We're in hell after all," he shouted. As he did this, I looked over at the goth girl just in time to see her begin to cut herself. She cut herself deep and hard from the looks of it. The plain-dressed men sitting next to her began to laugh in a high-pitched tone, almost a giggle. And that's when I noticed that he was masturbating. Only not in the sense that we all do at home. No. His penis was raw, bloody, torn away in places. But he just kept doing it. "Stop that! Look at y'all! Look at yourselves! Look what you're doing to yourself!" I screamed at them. I screamed at them all. They looked at me, and I noticed that the girl was crying, but also smiling. Her eyes were practically begging to her self-inflicted pain to stop, yet she just kept cutting. I had seen enough, and I reached over and attempted to pull the knife out of her hand. Just then I felt a strong grip on my shoulder, stronger than anything I'd ever felt in my life. It was the bartender. He had came around the bar to grab me. No, 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 sir," he screamed into my ear. "Every patron of hell gets to enjoy their treats without judgment. After all, judgment has already been passed. We exist beyond that now. Let her cut. She loves it after all. Can't you see she loves it? She is smiling ear to ear. The bartender dragged me back to the stool, and with great speed, she's somehow back behind the bar again. Now, you wanted secrets, right, Kurt? You were bored and wanted more. That is what you came here for, right? Now, drink. As I sat at the bar, your drink before I beat your fucking face in. Drink it. Through all of this, he never stopped smiling. He slammed the glass down before me. A murky liquid was inside it. He grabbed my arm and began to squeeze. The pain became unbearable. My mind began to race. This was no bar. This was something, but it was no bar. I wasn't ready to believe that I was actually in hell, but I knew that I was somewhere bad. Drink your drink, sir, he screamed again, and fearing that I was about to pass out from the pain, I slammed down the liquid in front of me. It tasted horrible. I couldn't describe it, even to this day. And I can't now, but it was fierce. He let go of me, and suddenly the room got much hotter. The light began to flicker, and suddenly I was afflicted by knowledge. Things that I didn't want to know. Things that no one would want to know. My mother had an affair. The man I had grown up calling Dad was in fact not my father at all. I had a brother who died. I never knew. My boss at work hated me. My grandfather committed suicide, and all these years I just thought he died naturally. My mother was going to abort me, but changed her mind because she couldn't afford the abortion. I was going to die alone. My wife, a woman I would meet in 6 years and fall madly in love with, would die in a car crash with my 3-year-old son in the back seat. There was nothing I could do to change this. I would go blind in my 60s from a work-related accident. There were currently 34 people in the world right now, some who I thought of as friends, who wanted me to die. They hated me and wanted me dead. No one, not my mother, not my father, not one had ever loved me at all. These were just a few of the secrets that suddenly hit me. There were thousands, maybe millions more, but by then my mind couldn't process them all. There were some things about me, things about people I knew that were so dark that I am thankful that I cannot remember them, because to dwell on them for even a second longer would have brought on madness. Frantically, I looked around the bar. The woman Nancy was still smoking, only her throat was on fire now. A small red glow smoldering right in the middle of her throat. She was clearly in the worst pain of her existence, but she continued to take puff after puff of her cigarette. Each time she did, the glow on her throat would get brighter. I looked straight ahead into the mirror and behind the bar, seeing the gore fest that had begun behind me. However, what took my attention was the small black figure standing directly to my right. It was maybe 5 feet tall. Its skin was jet black. The only thing that stood out was its eyes. They were human eyes, but bright. Not glowing, just bright enough to stand out from the onyx of its face. It had small horns, and its head, it had very white, very sharp teeth. Somehow I knew this was Den, and I was in his house. I looked towards the door, but it was gone. The heat continued to get worse. The secrets were still popping into my mind, each worse than the other before. Entire dimensions of my soul were being revealed to me. All of it horrible. Just then my cell phone rang. The ringtone, something from my world, something from up above, it grabbed my attention. And in that moment, the secret slowed down a bit. I looked down. It was 4 a.m. Mike. My friend Mike was calling to check on me. I have a friend named Mike, my best friend. The more I focused on things that were real, the more stable things became around me. The secrets were almost stopping now. The macabre scene around me was slowing down. Nancy was back to just smoking. The goth girl wasn't cutting. The sinister face of Den, it had also retreated just a bit. Mike, my oldest friend, yes. We grew up together. We rode our bikes together. We had sleepovers, pizza parties. And the more I focused on the real world, I could just see that the door was back, and I bolted for it. "Stop! You had your chance to back out," screamed the bartender. And I looked back just in time to see him leap over the bar behind me. I shot through the doors and back into the tiny, impossible hot hallway. The bartender burst through the doors, and I did the only thing that I could think of. If thinking about the real world weakened this place, then perhaps a real link to the real world would break it. I hit answer. I answered it on my cell phone. I pressed the button, and the voice of my best friend, who was calling from the safety of his apartment, greeted my ears. I could even hear music in the background. Real music. Mike, call the cops," I said. "I'm in a real trouble here," I screamed into the phone. "What? I can barely hear you, man. Your connection sucks," he answered. The bartender was still coming, still grinning. I had one idea left. I pushed speaker on my phone. Mike's voice, a product of the living world, owned by someone who had not made a deal to enter some level of hell, flooded the hallway. The bartender stopped. "He is not allowed to know of this place, to have any contact without being invited. Even voice contact. It violates the Council of Nod," the bartender said. That was when the final blow to the bar from hell was delivered. I heard Mike say, in his sleepy yet concerned voice, he said, "What is the Council of Nod?" Contact had been made. Whatever rules govern this place had been broken. Suddenly the elevator came down. The bartender, still smiling, looked down at me. "Sorry, sir, but you have violated the rules. You are no longer welcome in this bar. Please leave." Jody was standing in the elevator. I stood up and climbed in. The effects of the drink I consumed were gone. No more secrets. My phone had died. I guess calling from hell drains a battery. However, the effects were gone. And the effects were enough. We rode up in silence. When we reached the surface, Jody walked me out of the house, onto the stoop. Then she spoke. "You may think that you won the war tonight, but you didn't. You had a chance to ride this elevator up as well as down, and your heart wanted secrets instead of happiness. So it went down. You could have went up, and everything that you could have ever possibly desired would have been yours. So go on, feel proud. We like proud mortals, because the proud ones always find their way back to hell." "Fuck you, Jody," I replied, but did so as I was walking away. I didn't want to tempt these people any more than I already had. When I got home that night, I remembered almost all of the secrets. Now, over the years, they have slipped away, slowly at first, then like a dream, I would wake up and more would be lost. I wrote down the ones that I listed here because I didn't want to forget them all. However, when I read them now, they didn't seem like secrets anymore. Just like weird lies. Of course, I called the police the very next day, and I wanted to help those people down there. I had to dress up the story a bit, and I told the cops that I was led there by Jody after meeting her in the quarter. I left out the part about the place possibly being a level of hell and simply described it as a basement where people were being tortured. The cops got a warrant and went in. The house was empty, as I said it was. However, there was no elevator found. The cops said that there was a large closet area that it appeared to have had an elevator at it in one time, but it was long gone now. The house itself was still on the market. It had no owner. For a few years, I would go down to Jackson Square around 2 a.m. hoping to catch Jody luring another victim into the house. However, I never saw her again. Years went on. I did marry. And no, my wife was never killed in a car accident. And we don't have any kids yet, though perhaps when I violated the contract, the Council of Nod or whatever, I somehow broke that cycle. I'll never know, but I will be careful. After I posted this, I burned the list of secrets that I had written down. Of course, I could always read them on here, but I won't. And in time, hopefully, I will forget them too. I never confronted my mother about the abortion plan or asked who my real dad was. Those secrets seemed so real, but Satan is also called the father of lies for a reason. And I'm not sure if Den is Satan or just a lesser version of him. But I doubt that Den is a very honest sort either. I post this as a warning though. A warning to be careful when seeking out secrets. Some things are best kept secret for a reason, and to know them is to know madness.